Hello friends, we're going to welcome you all back to part 2 of the special prophecy update, the special Friday Night Live. We've taken some time to talk about things that are happening in our world today, how that lines up with the Bible. But now we're going to share with you some rather remarkable statements that have been made by religious leaders, by governments, by influential individuals, pastors, teachers, and how this might play into some of the prophetic signs that we find in the Bible as to where we are in the stream of time. But before we get to that, we'd like to let you know about a free offer that we have. Amazing Facts has put together a magazine entitled Final Events, and we'd be happy to send this to, or actually get a digital copy of this by simply texting the number, the word future to the number 40544. Again, you just text the word future to the number 40544. You'll get a digital copy of the Final Events of Bible Prophecy magazine.
That's brand new. They'll really enjoy that.
Yes, just been released. All right, Pastor Doug, we've gotten to that part of the program where we're going to be sharing some rather important information. And to kind of set this up, we got a slide that we might put on the screen for you to see. It's entitled A Chorus of Voices Calling for Sunday Laws. Now, of course, as a movement, as a church, there's been a lot of discussion about a day of rest or certain Sunday laws. How does this play into where we are right now?
Yeah, I was surprised. Let me just back up and explain. We know we have people from all different backgrounds. Someone shared with us during the break that there's at least 10,000 people watching on certain social media sites, not counting thousands that are watching live on AFTV and other venues. But as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we've always seen in the Bible, you've got in Daniel chapter 3, where the government, Nebuchadnezzar, makes a law that everybody has to break one of the 10 commandments or be killed. Of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not going to break the second commandment about idolatry. They stand up. God honors them. You get to Daniel chapter 6. The king of Persia makes a law that everybody in the empire must break the first commandment and pray to him. That's one of the 10 commandments. Daniel will not do that. He stands up for the Lord, and as a result of that, God honors him. He goes to the lion's den. There's a death decree. Then you read in Revelation 13, the beast power says that those who do not worship a certain way will be killed. Well, we believe that this time the devil's going to pick not the second or the first commandment, but the fourth commandment. And tell people not to not worship at all, but tell them what day to worship, not the seventh day, but another day. Now, I know there's going to be millions of spirit-filled Christians that worship God on the first day of the week, but we believe the seventh day is the Sabbath. And we think that in the end, there's going to actually be laws that will compel people, among other laws, going to compel people to worship God on a day that goes against what the Bible says. We are beginning to hear a chorus of voices from around the world, and I just put in major sources that are beginning to say maybe it's time for a Sabbath law. And it's interesting, it's coming from Jews, atheists, environmentalists, Catholics, Protestants. And let me just read a few, but before we get to it, maybe I should start out with, and this is an excerpt from the Pope's encyclical called Laudato Si, and that was given in 2015. And this is his encyclical, his official statement on the environment and God. And there's an excerpt here. I'm not reading the whole thing, but it says, on Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. Healing the world, as he's talking about the environment. Sunday, now he just shifted, notice, between Sabbath to Sunday. Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day, the new creation, whose first fruits are the Lord's risen humanity, the pledge of the final transfiguration of all created reality. It also proclaims man's eternal rest in God. Of course, nowhere does it say Sunday is the eternal rest in God. It protects human action from being empty activism. It also prevents that unfettered greed and the sense of isolation that makes us seek personal gain to the detriment of all else. To the law of the weekly rest. Now, he stopped calling it the seventh day. God, or he stopped designating that. He says, God forbade the work of the seventh day so that your ox and your donkey may have rest. and the son and your maidservant, and the stranger might be refreshed. Rest opens our eyes to the larger picture and gives us a renewed sensitivity to the rights of others. And so the day of rest, centered in the Eucharist, now for them the Eucharist means Sunday, the Mass, sheds its light on the whole week and motivates us to greater concern for nature, the environment, and the poor. So in his statement, he's basically saying the environment needs that day of rest also. But as time goes by, what day do you think the world's going to pick?
You know, Pastor Doug, the amazing thing about this statement is that we're calling for a day of rest, and the reason for that, as he ties into it, is two things. Number one, the world needs it, meaning the environment needs it. Secondly, it's talking about society needs it, the poor need it. We need to have a time of rest. It's interesting how they're using this. Not only are you pulling together, as you mentioned, those who are very concerned about the environment, pushing for certain legislation to protect the environment, along with those who are concerned about society and the poor and the needs of others, kind of pulling these two groups together and saying the answer is a day of rest. Now, of course, the Pope's quite clear on what that day of rest would be. As he mentioned in that statement, he's talking about the first day of the week, Sunday.
Absolutely. Now, that was, of course, from 2015. But now this is more recent, as you'll see. And this is from CNN, Rome. Pope Francis, and this was April 8, has said that the coronavirus pandemic is one of nature's responses to humans ignoring the current ecological crisis. In an email interview published Wednesday in the Tablet and Commonwealth magazines, the pontiff said that the outbreak offered an opportunity to slow down the rate of production and consumption. Well, that goes along with his encyclical. And to learn to understand and contemplate the natural world. We did not respond to the partial catastrophes. Who now speaks in the fires of Australia or remembers 18 months ago a boat could cross the North Pole because glaciers had all melted. He's talking about, look what's happened to the environment. Who speaks now of the floods? The Pope said, I don't know. If these are revenge of nature. It's interesting, even some conservative Catholics are saying the Pope is sounding like Mother Nature is God now. The revenge of nature. But they're certainly nature's response, he added. The pandemic has radically changed the way the Vatican operates, with the Pope celebrating Palm Sunday Mass in an empty church, and the sites normally packed with tourists are empty. And this is from this week, Vatican City, April 22nd, 2020. For Earth Day. On Earth Day, the Pope says, nature will not forgive our trespasses. He's a real advocate for the environment. Pope Francis made an impassioned plea for protection of the environment on Wednesday's 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day, saying the coronavirus pandemic has shown that some challenges had to be met with a global response. Francis praised the environmental movement, saying it was necessary for young people. You remember that girl Greta took to the streets and she sort of became the poster girl. She was closing down schools. That the young people need to take to the streets and teach us about what is obvious, that there will be no future for us if we destroy the environment that sustains us. The Pope, who wrote a major encyclical, notice what they refer back to, that encyclical that talks about the Sabbath. He wrote an encyclical in 2015 on the defense of nature and the dangers of climate change, dedicated to his general audience, broadcast from his library because of the coronavirus lockdown. So I'm not going to read all of this, or we're going to run out of time. Here's April 20, 2020. Francis traveled a few blocks outside the Vatican walls on Sunday to celebrate Mass at a nearby church to mark a special feast on a day dedicated to mercy. On Sunday, he delivered a broader message about the inequality and the need for a post-virus world to rethink its priorities, and a theme that echoes with the pre-pandemic preaching of the world's first Latin American Pope. He's taking up the cause of the poor here. And again, he's bringing together the families, the poor. People everywhere are noticing that the air is a little cleaner, the water's a little cleaner, it's a little quieter in the streets. Some of our friends who are missionaries in India, they actually took their phone. We were doing a live conference with them. They took their phone to the streets of Hyderabad, and we were there together not long ago. And it's just a constant cacophony of noise, of honking and beeping and yelling. And you could hear birds. And it was really eerie. She said, we haven't heard birds. And so people are noticing this. And they're saying maybe God is telling us we need to start keeping a Sabbath.
And you know, Pastor Doug, before we get to this next important quote, something I just want to highlight is you can see the call for a global cooperation to work on the environment.
Yeah.
And of course, the Vatican's calling for this. So it's not just individual countries doing their part, but the suggestion is being made that we need to have a global cooperation. We need to have an entity to lead this type of reform and revival. And of course, a day of rest in the week is very important, is a central part of this solution.
You know, I could easily see if they make a committee and says, you know, we need to have a world committee that's going to care for the environment and try and help us heal from this pandemic. I'd be surprised if they did not ask the Pope to be on the committee, because he has been such a voice for these things since before it happened.
Right.
I just want to save some time here. Let me go back here. Yeah, this is AP News, April 2020. There's a grave risk that while COVID-19 might eventually be tamed, the virus of selfishness and indifference could take its place. To combat that risk, the Pope said, let us welcome this time of trial as an opportunity to prepare for our collective future. Because without an all-embracing vision, there will be no future for anyone. This is like life and death. Mm-hmm. By the way, I think many folks know that the Pope had initially called for the world leaders to come together and form a compact May 14. That date has been postponed to October. I forget the exact date. But he's still calling the world to come together, official compact, to re-educate the world on how we can save the environment and society. Here's one from Green Sabbath Project Net. One emissions-free day per week. This is not, I don't think, a religious group. One emissions-free day per week can make a profound impact on climate change. Green Sabbath is a non-religious, non-political, non-profit campaign that aims to raise awareness and to encourage people to help slow climate change, preserve precious natural resources, and improve planet health by observing at least one carbon footprint-free day each week on any day of the week, and we can call it symbolically a Green Sabbath Day. So they're saying, well, we're not saying what day, but if the world's going to agree to close stores, would they say everyone pick their own day? Well, then, it defeats the purpose. They're going to want for a particular day of the week. What day is that going to be?
Right.
It's going to obviously be, even when you go to China, they take Sunday off and they're communists. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty clear, I think, what day that will be. And just jump in if you have a thought on any of this. Here is something from the Jerusalem Post, and this is April 2, 2020. We need Shabbat now more than ever in the days of the coronavirus. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household. We didn't practice Shabbat in any consistent way, but now as an adult, while Judaism remains the centering and important part of my life, I've still never properly kept Shabbat in my home. There's a long-standing tradition whereby the rabbis teach us that Shabbat is both a day of rest and also a taste of the world to come. That's how I've always thought of the ritual and practice itself. A future, an adulthood, a commandment to come. I'll start doing Shabbat when I'm married, when I have kids. Well, I'm 36 and single, and spending this pandemic alone, so if not now, when? The author asks. Here's a Jerusalem Post. Now listen to this. This is sustainability is a Jewish value. Here it is where religion, catalyzed by the Jewish people, can save the planet because of Shabbat observance in Israel. Greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by a third and nearly zero on Yom Kippur. One of the 10 Commandments and one of the gifts of the Jews is to sanctify a time through the day of rest every week. And he goes on to quote the philosopher Ahad Imam famously taught, more than Jews have kept the Sabbath. Shabbat is kept the Jews. If every denomination of the Jewish people truly sanctified Shabbat as a non-consumer day of rest, and this example was followed by other faith communities, then Shabbat would save the Jewish people along with the entire planet. A real universal day of rest could cut greenhouse gas emissions by 1/7, allowing our turbulent planet to calm back into balance. Now, friends, I think everyone knows here, I'm not saying these quotes are saying, let's fix a day for a Sunday law. I think what we are hearing them say is there seems to be a global recognition that maybe we need to start looking at some kind of universal day of cessation which is what the word Sabbath actually means.
Now, as you mentioned, we got some very big entities that are calling for some kind of day of rest.
Yeah, and we got more to come too.
There is. You've got Jews
Yeah.
recognizing it. You've got Catholics recognizing it. You have atheists who are very supportive of the environment,
Right.
who are also supporting a particular day of rest. You've got all these big entities coming together and agreeing on something in common, recognizing that it's a good idea to have one day of rest every week. Well, we'll find out what day is being promoted as you get into some of these additional quotes that you have.
And in case anybody misunderstands, Pastor Ross and I believe and keep the Sabbath. We believe that the day of rest, it's in the Bible, and it's part of God's plan. But here's the major difference. And it really came from one of our founders, Roger Williams. He recognized that the 10 Commandments were given on 2 tables of stone. The first 4 commandments deal with our relationship with God. That is something that is really a personal choice. You cannot force people to love God, what God to serve, who He is, when to worship Him. That really, we need to have freedom. America was based on no one is going to tell anyone else how to keep the first 4 commandments. But every culture, society must respect the last 6. You can't rob, you can't steal, perjury, and those values must be taught across the board. But what we're concerned about is if the world thinks, because they're afraid, they get kind of hyper-religious and start saying, we need to tell everybody how to keep the first 4, that's going to lead into the mark of the beast issues, telling you how to worship and when to worship and who to worship. That is really the essence of what we're worried about right now.
And of course, we find that as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And you mentioned a little earlier, Revelation chapter 13, where you do find at the end of time, this has not happened yet, but in the end of time, you have a worldwide coalition of leading entities, religious, political, even secular powers, uniting to enforce a particular type of worship. Mm-hmm. That worship, unfortunately, is not the worship that God calls for, and not that God ever requires civil authorities to enforce any kind of worship. And I think as Christians, whatever your particular belief might be as to what is accurate worship, I think whenever a government tries to enforce a particular type of worship, we as true Christians should say, no, you can't do that.
That's right.
You know, we have freedom to worship God according to the dictates of one's conscience. And I think that's the concern. There is a movement to enforce a particular day of rest, which we know will eventually lead to a particular form of worship.
Yeah, and if you should disagree, and if people are afraid and they think that maybe we're being punished because of our disobedience, you'll become the object of scorn in society. Well, let me read a couple more of these. Here's an interesting article. It's very well written, called If History Rhymes. And this is the New Boston Post, April 1, 2020. At least one societal change resulting from the quarantine could do wonders to reinvigorate our national sense of family, faith, and community. Let's give serious thought to reinstating at least some of the time-honored Sunday closure laws. This is interesting, coming out of Boston of all places. That's where the blue laws began. Sunday closure laws, sort of a one-day-per-week modified stay-at-home request. Sucks, and many of the articles, this is the theme. They say, look what's happening. Maybe it's not a bad idea to do this voluntarily. Stay at home, rest, shut down all businesses. Families, meals, civic associations, religious observance, by redirecting each Sunday as a common day of rest, we would say that the life of America is much more than a never-pausing commerce and a never-grinding bureaucracy. We would proclaim that the heart of the nation transcends consumerism, and it looms larger than even the biggest government. But whoever imagined that commerce and bureaucracy would grind to a halt for so many days and weeks and perhaps months as a result of a deadly virus? There's no one alive who completely remembers the flu epidemic of a century ago. Every breathing baby boomer easily recalls limitations to commercial activities on Sunday. One might suggest that with today's coronavirus, we are in a tragic, in a certain sense, reliving or going back in history. Another venerable aphorism, often misattributed to Mark Twain, says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And history does sometimes repeat itself.
So, Pastor, just to kind of break this down, because it's kind of interesting. So here you have a call from a newspaper, secular entity, saying the good old days involved certain laws or restrictions having to do with Sunday. We think that this coronavirus is a good opportunity for us to rethink and try and implement some of these Sunday laws.
Yeah, and this article was not a religious magazine.
Right.
These are secular people. We've always wondered, how would secular people, how would atheists and agnostics ever buy into a day of rest?
Right.
Well, we see it. It's unfolding, I think,
Amazing.
before our eyes right now. Here's something from The Guardian. Now, this is a few years ago, but it's still very relevant. People are reprinting this article now. Slow Sunday, the simple solution to global warming. We cannot wait till governments are enlightened enough to legislate and cap the carbon emissions. Matters are urgent. We have to act now without any delay. The power of public opinion and citizen action will have a strong impact on the climate conference taking place in Copenhagen. One thing we can easily do to achieve this goal, we can declare Sunday to be a fossil fuel-free day or a low-carbon day or at least a non-energy saving day. What is it? At least an energy saving day. We can start this week, this month, or in 2010, we can start individually and collectively. The long journey to cut carbon dioxide emissions can start here and now. Not long ago, Sunday used to be a day of rest, a day of spiritual renewal, a day for families to come together. But we've changed Sunday from a day of rest into shopping, flying, and driving. However, the context of excessive carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, which are bringing catastrophic upheavals, we can and should restore Sunday to a day for Gaia, a day for the earth. And this is a repeat. And of course, this is an old article, but this is being requoted now. And this is The Guardian, major English
Pastor,
mega paper.
It's as if you almost have, this is back in 2009, it's as if the agenda was already set to try and promote a particular day for the environment. Now we have a reason to, we've got this coronavirus.
People are listening.
The earth is rebelling, and now's the time to implement this agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one, and then it goes on. They say, we can reduce carbon emissions 10% by taking one day a week, making it a carbon-free day. Here's a New Boston Post. This is now the same magazine, but now this is their article from April 1, 2020. Let's give serious thought to reinstating at least some of the time-honored Sunday closures, a sort of one-day-per-week modified stay-at-home request. Such action would rededicate our society to a regular day of rest, family meals, civic associations, and religious observance. So they're appealing to all aspects of society. Wow. And this is in New Boston. These are major outlets. I think it was interesting that since the virus started, and Francis Legault, Canadian Premier of Quebec, we're announcing today businesses will be closed on Sunday. And this was, you've got the YouTube, this was a YouTube message, so I can't give you the date, but this has been in April. Air pollution and CO2 fall rapidly as virus spreads. And this is BBC News. Researchers in New York told BBC their early results show carbon monoxide, mainly from cars, has been reduced by nearly 50% compared with last year. Emissions of the planet heating gas CO2 have also fallen sharply. And I've seen several articles and reports where they actually have satellites that have been launched that can take pictures of the Earth and see, using infrared, where there's buildups of carbon in the cities. They show the same time last year, the red you see all around the cities are all red in the maps. Then they show since the virus hit, and it is an amazing difference in the air and the environment that they can see in the water. So people are noting this. They're saying maybe we should try to do this more often. And they're not going to tell us take a month off. The economy can't handle that. But the economy is set up where they say we could probably afford one day off.
Right.
Puerto Rico, this is, a smaller issue. Just some of the countries are doing this. New emergency decree, March 31st, and I read that they extended this beyond that. Runs through April 12. There's closing even grocery stores on Sunday.
Everything on Sunday.
This is a Filipino priest, and this was written since the virus began. This pandemic is the first calamity of a global magnitude to have shaken the world this badly since World War. And yet, a friend drew my attention today to reports that due to less travel and public activity, there's a lot less trash accumulating on streets, a lot less pollution in the air and the water for these few days. As the engines of manufacturing grind to a halt, the earth is getting the first real chance to rest, You notice it's here religious groups saying the earth needs to rest. I mean, we all use the earth. Who can argue with that? That it has not had in decades. So maybe one way to look at the current crisis is to see it as the planet's desperate demand for a Sabbath, a cessation from unbridled consumerism and the parasitic activity that work becomes when the pursuit of profit becomes its primary goal. And then he quotes back to the Pope. Pope Francis has warned us that the global economy as it operates today often ends up generating profits at the expense of a planet and the poor. So this season of Lent, as we reflect on our sins and shortcomings in the light of God's mercy, we can ponder whether there are better ways of living and working that do not tax people on the planet to their breaking point. That's Brother Michael Valenzuela. And so, by the way, Philippines is 80 million people, mostly Catholic. And so, these voices are going to mega places around the world.
Now, I think the point, again, just to emphasize, is you've got the environmentalists, and you've given us some quotes here from the Catholic authorities that are coming together, uniting, saying the earth needs a day of rest. Now they're suggesting, well, we can maybe have a day of rest. Let's make it the first day of the week. Let's make it Sunday to let the earth rest. So they're coming in from not only a religious perspective, but now for the environment.
Something else. I'm not a prophet. And friends, what I'm sharing now, I just felt I could keep this to myself. I shared it with Pastor Ross. I thought, we probably ought to. People are sending me things. I'm sort of compiling it. And this isn't everything. That it just seems like there is a chorus of voices around the world that seems orchestrated towards the same goal. Now, I could be wrong, but I can foresee that as the different states, countries, and communities begin to lessen the regulations, they're not going to do it all at once. They're going to do it in degrees. They're going to do some checks and balances and try things. I wouldn't be shocked if they don't say, look, in the interest of public health, we're going to let you go back to work, but to minimize, some of these things, maybe we ought to at least, let the environment rest, or I don't know. If they're going to call out
Right.
Sunday at that time. Of course, I think a lot of churches are going to say, we got to get back together. They're going to want to do that. Let me see what else we got here. Oh, this is a mayor in Canada. He tweets that everything should be closed on Sunday after the virus. And I won't even read all that. April 15th, this is an interesting article from the Pea Ridge Times, 2020, April 15th this month. Sporting events have been canceled, entertainment venues are closed, restaurants are closed. Now people are wondering about graduations, kindergarten, high school, college graduations, which usually draw large family gatherings. Recently, I drove through the parking lot of the mall in Rogers, that's the nearby community. It was virtually empty. The first thought that crossed my mind, unbidden, was it must be Sunday. And then I realized I had basically gone back in time more than 50 years when I was young growing up in the Deep South. Stores and businesses closed at 5 or 6 p.m., meaning on Saturday evening, and were not opened again until Sunday. In fact, after church and Sunday lunch, the country club, Granddaddy would drive us around to window shop. Nowadays, with stores open 7 days a week, there's no more window shopping, except for now with the quarantine. Stores are again closed. Years ago, Sunday was a different day than other 6 days of the week. Church parking lots were full. Store parking lots were empty. Stores were closed. Occasionally, a gasoline station, we called them filling stations, was open. But it was the exception instead of the rule. Even people who didn't go to church used Sunday for a day of rest and relaxation. Today, Sunday is not so much different than the work day, except many stores don't open until noon. Maybe this time of enforced isolation will teach us something. This is the kind of thing I'm reading and hearing everywhere.
Amazing.
Maybe we'll find ways to celebrate time within our overpacked, busy, demanding schedules for recreation, relaxation, relationships, for family and friends. Maybe we'll come out of the other side of this wiser.
So people are looking for maybe some good as a result of this quarantine, this
Yeah.
virus, and they're saying, well, one of the things that is good, we can see definite benefits to the environment. We'll see benefits for family. People are spending time together. They're eating meals together. People don't have to go to work on a particular day. Religious entities are saying, well, we also agree there needs to be a day of rest. We need to have a Sabbath, as they say. And they're encouraging this not just to be one country, but they're encouraging almost a worldwide slowdown and Sabbath on the first day of the week.
All of these are actually good arguments, and that's what makes this, that there's a possibility people misunderstand what we're saying. These are good arguments. I think God did give us a Sabbath where he wants family time, more quality time. We need the physical rest. The environment does get, he said, even your ox and your donkey get to rest. Right. And those are all good things. What I'm concerned about is that as our world continues to have environmental problems, natural disasters, and people are afraid about what's happening to the world, when they start to enforce it and telling us when to do it and how to do it and where to do it. And that's the concern, is that people will become religious for the wrong reasons, and historically that turns into tyranny. And so all we're doing by this program is saying, friends, you need to make sure your antenna is raised. You know, in the old radios, you didn't get reception unless you brought the little antenna up. And we're hoping that everyone has their antenna up right now. See, I'm using a metaphor I don't even know if people understand anymore. By the way, this was from the Pea Ridge Times. Why God took Sunday away. This is from Pastor Robert Field, Bethel Baptist Church. God is not pleased with what we have been doing to his day of worship. Therefore, he is shutting it down for a time. His approach in his article is, churches can't gather. Maybe God is punishing us because even Christians were not keeping Sunday the way they should, is his line of logic he's following here. We're not honoring the fourth commandment. Sunday has become optional to Christians. The worst part is we're teaching the next generation Sunday is not important. It's optional. Perhaps with the loss of Sunday in the weeks ahead, we'll begin to see its necessity and stop fooling around with the fourth commandment.
Now, of course, the fourth commandment is quite different than saying, you got to remember the first day of the week. The fourth commandment says, remember the seventh day to keep it holy. It says it's the Sabbath. So the fourth commandment is being reinvented, or a new day is being applied to that. And as you can see, it's promoting Sunday, not the seventh-day Sabbath.
And in many Protestant Catholic churches where they keep Sunday, when they say Sabbath or the Lord's Day, they often use it interchangeably when they're talking to each other. They think they're talking Sunday. And I realize that listening to this program right now, there's a growing number of Sabbatarian Christians. We know there's a lot of Messianic Jews that see things probably like Pastor Ross and I, that the commandment, it does matter what day you keep, but we still don't think the governments should be compelling people to do that. We shouldn't be compelling people how to worship. Jesus never forced people to worship him and say, you do it, or you're going to jail. Right. Follow me, you're going to jail. But there are Sunday laws on the books. I don't know if I have the article included in our list here, but one of the articles was saying we need to resurrect the blue laws.
Yes.
So, yeah, more of that is happening. And this is just an excerpt, a smaller one. Only Saturday for shopping. I thought that was interesting. The only day that they could shop in Grenada was Saturday. And there was such an outcry. I heard that they repealed this. But I thought that was interesting that someone actually said the only day you can shop is the only day that God said you shouldn't.
Right.
And so that was interesting. Let's see here. This is from the Tablet magazine, a Jewish periodical. The Sabbath in an era of climate change, an ancient Jewish practice may help save us all. This is from this year, February 3. We humans face a set of dire ecological crises. Those are the results of what many now call Anthropocene era, the era of human modification of the Earth's planetary systems. These crises, global warming, altered weather, species extinction, the threats of various kinds of toxic pollution, the proliferation of garbage, soil erosion, desertification, declining freshwater supplies, and so on, constitutes not only an absolutely real imminent threat to the future well-being of humankind, but also it sometimes seems a modern manifestation of the various latines of biblical curses. The multiplicitous nature of the crisis demands multiple solutions: political, economical, technological, psychological, ethical, behavioral, and even spiritual. He throws in the spiritual at the very end. But among the things he's talking about, you'll notice here, I'm jumping down, Shabbat, the Sabbath day of rest, a weekly ritual, both symbolic and with real-world impacts. Widespread observance of Sabbath, done right, could reduce environmental harm by about 1/7 in as much of the world and provide a platform for ongoing meditating on our environmental sins and consequences. So this is, a Jewish magazine, but it's sort of taking an agnostic approach that, it's going to save the environment. But it's, again, this sounds like it's right in rhythm, in harmony with these other voices.
Absolutely. Again, you got it coming from the Catholic side, you got it coming from the evangelical side, you got it coming from the environmental side, and you got it coming from the Jewish side. So these entities are coming together, uniting, coalescing around a time of rest for the environment. And it's been suggested that there be a Sabbath of rest. And I think we understand what day is being promoted.
Now, there's a lot more information that we could share with people. Some of them, I like to pull on things like Jerusalem Post, BBC, Boston magazines that are more renowned. Some things are a little more tabloid, and I want to try and give people credible documentation. And you notice on this bottom of the slides, if you want to watch this tape, I'm sure it's going to be archived at Facebook or YouTube, and you can back up and see it again. You'll have the references so people can look these things up for themselves. But we just see that there is, people are afraid to become more religious. And this isn't all bad. We see that people are taking an interest in Bible study, which is good. What do we got going on next year? Is that the last of our slides?
Still more.
Oh, yeah. I thought this would be good. We want to give a quote here, kind of. Maybe we'll do this in summary. From the Spirit of Prophecy. I don't know if you want to read this, Pastor Ross?
Yes, we find the statement that we can read in the book, Great Controversy. It's a classic, page 589. It says, while appearing to the children of men as a great physician who can heal all their maladies, he will bring disease and disaster.
Satan, of course.
He's talking about the devil.
Yeah.
Upon populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation. Even now he is at work in accidents and calamities by sea and by land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes, terrific hailstorms, in tempests and floods, cyclones, tidal waves, earthquakes. In every place and in 1,000 forms Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air, I find this statement interesting, he imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon both man and beast. The earth mourneth and fadeth away. The haughty people do languish. The earth is also defiled at the inhabitants thereof. Now, we put this in. You'll notice there on the quote, it's in brackets, climate change or global warming.
Question mark. I saw that. I did that. It says, the earth is defiled unto the inhabitants. And, of course, Revelation says, God will destroy those that destroy the earth. And the cry of the world right now is climate change, global warming, the environmental pollution problems. Everyone's aware there are real issues. And
finishing up that quote, which is actually from Isaiah 24, it says, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Now, we just spent some time, Pastor Doug, talking about how efforts have been made to change God's law and reinterpret the fourth commandment.
Yeah. And then it goes on, it says, and then the great deceiver will persuade men that those who serve God are causing these evils. If we don't go along with, a mandated day of worship or rest. The class that have provoked the displeasure of heaven will charge all their troubles upon those whose obedience to God's commandments is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, and that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced, and that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people, preventing the restoration and divine and temporal prosperity. So it makes it sound like there's been an economic problem because people are looking for temporal prosperity to be restored.
Now, Pastor Doug, just to comment on that, when was this written? Was this written in the last 30, 60 days, that statement that you just read?
It wasn't February. I think this is 150 years old, maybe.
It's just amazing when you look at that statement to see what's really happening in the world just from these various sources that you quoted from, sort of a coming together, fulfillment of this statement that was written more than 150 years ago.
There's a statement in Revelation that says, wear out the patience of the saints. Yeah. We've been going 90 minutes now, and we want to make sure we don't wear out the patience of the saints and or take advantage of our media team that's volunteering here in our worship room. We've got more to share. We think probably at least a few more weeks they're going to, at least in California, it seems like they're going to continue some element of shutdown for a few more weeks. I think we're going to have some more programs where we'll provide updates for people. Please take advantage of our free offer. You want to mention that again, Pastor Ross?
Yes, for those of you who are listening, again, we've got our magazine called The Final Events of Bible prophecy. We'd be happy to send this to anyone who would just text the word future to the number 40544, and you'll get a digital download of this magazine, and I think you'll find it an encouragement. You know, Pastor Doug, I think our last slide is actually a quote from Jesus, and it's an encouraging quote that we find in Matthew chapter 24.
Jesus said, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors." And so, friends, we're excited to be living in this time, because I want to live and see Jesus come.
Amen.
And I want to see other people get ready. We know that the Lord is long-suffering. He's waited patiently because he's not willing that any should perish. And friends, I think that you're watching this program by a divine design.
Amen.
We hope that you'll take it as the voice of the Holy Spirit for you to surrender your life to Jesus, become acquainted with the truth of his word, come to him, and then go for him. Be a witness. Live out his life within you. We want to thank you for tuning in tonight. We hope you'll share this video and let your friends know about this important information. And we'll be giving you more from Amazing Facts as time progresses. Have a blessed Sabbath. We hope you can join us tomorrow morning.